Today we're going to talk about urgency. And urgency is one of the key features of overactive bladder. And I'm going to keep today's kind of brief. But the first thing we're going to talk about is what is urgency. And so urgency is, again, I want you to know there's a key difference between urge. And so urge is the normal feeling that anyone healthy has to let them know that they have to go to the bathroom. And so that's perfectly normal. That's what you would expect to find. Our urgency is always abnormal. And urgency is a beyond normal sense that you have to go to the bathroom. And then for most people, it also involves frequency, where they're feeling this urge to go to the bathroom kind of frequently or all the time throughout the day. But also it can involve accidents. And so urgency, a big part of it, all of us have experienced urgency. So, with children, we all see urgency young when they're learning to kind of control their bladders. Urgency, like have to go and they really have a limited time before they can get there, or they have an accident. Unfortunately, we also see urgency in this condition, overactive bladder. And so overactive bladder, one of the hallmarks of it is urgency, that you have this really great urge to go to the bathroom, and it's more than normal. And that urgency, unfortunately, has a really negative health consequences and really a bad effects on your quality of life. So the question is, why do we get it? And so that is actually it's a simple question, but it's a really complex answer. And the short answer is, we don't exactly know how urgency fully works. We know that there are these little sensors inside the bladder that get stretched. And as these little sensors stretch, they let us know when the bladder is getting full and that we have to go. And we also know that there are certain conditions. And so I actually listed one of the articles that I thought was pretty interesting. And it's the article is how your body senses the urge to urinate. But basically, this article goes into deep detail about the specific genes that get expressed in people. And if these genes get expressed, so if you have a genetic issue, and so we'll really see this overactive bladder, we'll see this in families. My mom had this, my sister has this, I have this. Or my dad had this same condition and I have this. So we really see this familial trend, and that's your genetic aspect of this. But this mentions a specific gene that they're actually looking at, and how they've seen when adjusting these genes, they can actually cause this problem. Those genes get controlled by special nerves, and those nerves are called the dorsal root ganglion, and they send the sensation kind of back and forth to those genes that go into the bladder. And so what we know about overactive bladder is really it's a nerve problem, that the nerves, you're getting too many or mixed signals, and it's telling you have to go all the time, you have to go right now, and oftentimes you're having an accident. So urgency is a really complex phenomenon. It involves the muscles, the nerves, and then these little genetic sensors that we have as well, sensors that are all encoded by these genes or genetics. Generally, we will rank urgency, and so we rank it 1 to 4. So 1 is perfectly normal. I'm doing this little chat with you guys, and I feel like, you know what, I need to go to the bathroom. I'm going to wait till I'm done with this chat. I'm going to answer any questions that might come up. I'm not going to squeal or squirm. I'm just going to be able to finish comfortably. That's 1. 4 out of 4 is like, okay, I'm doing this chat, but I'm going to have an accident if I don't go right now, and I still might have an accident. So that's like an emergency. And so unfortunately, what we start to see with overactive bladder is people start to have this 3 or this 4 out of 4, where almost every time they go to the bathroom, it's like this emergent thing. They better get there or they're going to have an accident, or they feel like their bladder is going to explode or something like that. Those are all abnormal and signs of this condition that we call overactive bladder. And ultimately, we know that that's all affected by the nerves themselves. Another question, why is this bad? I think you guys can answer that question as well as I can. But I would say it's bad for so many different reasons. A lot of them just are quality of life reasons. So at nighttime, if you have urgency, you're waking up all the time to go to the bathroom. In the daytime, especially if you're traveling, you may not be familiar with where the closest bathroom is. It might be occupied, it might require a key, so on and so forth. And that becomes very, very dicey, and pretty soon you don't even want to leave your house because of urgency. So oftentimes people at their own home, let's say you live in a one-bedroom home with a one bathroom, you might go to the bathroom 10 or 20 times a day, but you might never have an accident because you can always make it right to your own bathroom. But as you start to leave that familiar environment, it becomes more and more difficult. And then ultimately it becomes bad because it's a sign that something's not right in the body. So it's like the canary in the coal mine. The canary starts chirping when there's something wrong in the coal mine and there's got to be an accident. That's what's happening inside your body. So we know that there are triggers for people, and they kind of tend to vary. So there are some physical triggers like food for some people, sometimes spicy food. Most people I talk to, this isn't a really significant one, but certain foods might aggravate it. Along with foods, sometimes constipation will make the bladder much more irritable. And that actually, the bladder and the bowels are connected to each other. The nerves travel on the same pathways. And so if you are constipated, you're probably getting all kinds of signals going up and down those same nerves, and it's irritating the bladder as well. Additionally, because of the proximity, they're just right on top of each other. And if one is kind of full and irritated, it's probably irritating the other one as well, just a mechanical issue. Sometimes drinks, and so this one's a little bit more common, I would say. So caffeinated beverages oftentimes they're diuretics and make you want to pee, so they irritate the bladder. And so that's something you should play around with in your diet. If I stop drinking so much coffee or tea or soda, does that help my condition? Alcohol is probably one of the very biggest irritants, and that's a really tough one because I think coffee and alcohol have such a big part of a lot of people's lifestyle that it's hard for them to wake up in the morning if they don't have their coffee, but that might irritate their bladder. Same thing at nighttime. It's hard for them to watch a ball game or relax on the couch unless they're drinking a beer or wine or whatever their alcoholic beverage of choice is. But limiting those things oftentimes can be beneficial for people just because they calm down irritation. What we're really figuring out about most disease states is the underlying root cause of almost every single disease. And this, I think, is very, very interesting because doctors have been looking for the longest time, like what's the root cause of all these different conditions? But the underlying root cause of almost every disease state is inflammation. And so what we know about overactive bladder is there's an inflammatory condition that's occurring in the bladder and ultimately in the nerves where they're firing off too many signals. Other triggers are more of the physical triggers that people have that cause urgency to occur. So for a lot of people, it's running water. So I've talked to a lot of people sitting at the sink and washing dishes. All of a sudden they'll have that, or just water running from a faucet. All of a sudden they'll have that. Putting their keys in the door when they first get door to open their front door will be a trigger, and they'll oftentimes release their bladder. I talked to a woman today. And just very, very simple triggers, opening of the garage door when she gets home will cause that. She can have full release. And then oftentimes with overactive bladder, we'll see just going from sitting to a standing position, just the positional changes of the body. Normally our brain and our bladder are really connected, and they're sending all these signals when to contract and relax all the various different muscles. And that becomes interfered with overactive bladder, and you'll start to see positional changes cause emptying of the bladder. The last thing that we'll talk about is, that's great. Now we know what urgency is, why we get it to some degree, how we rank it. why it's so bad for us, which you guys, again, I would love to hear how this has affected you. What are the triggers? I'd love to hear if you guys have any particular triggers that are affecting you, especially if they're kind of interesting or different. And then really, how do we overcome this? So the first thing that I'll mention is bladder training. I think is actually, important. And I think that's something that everyone can do at home. Bladder training is simply, if I have a strong urge to go, I'm not going to give in to that urge. I'm going to try and let that relax. And so you might say, instead of going immediately, I'm going to relax and wait 30 seconds before I listen to that signal and then go. And you're basically just training your brain and your bladder, hey, this is not an emergency. You need to calm down and relax and, let the normal functioning happening. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't have success with this because they'll have an accident if they wait at all. But I do think bladder training is beneficial. And so some people, let's say you go to the bathroom every 15 minutes at your house. You might set your clock and say, I'm going to go every 30 minutes. And then 2 weeks from now, I'm going to go every hour. And you're basically pushing out the frequency further and further to calm down the urgency and calm down those urges. Let those urges go more into the background than the foreground of how important that those are. Of course, what we specialize in, what I specialize in as a physician, is sacral neuromodulation. And from what I've seen, it's been one of the most effective things for people's urgency. And so it almost immediately begins to work on urgency. And so I always like to share just a few of the, success stories and what we have going on right now. And these are kind of active people who are either trying things out or, and so here's one gentleman. His urgency was always out of 4, like we talked about. It was an emergency. He always had to go, and then he was having accidents. Just as he is doing better, his intervals are going longer. Now he can go every 4 hours. He only got up a couple times last night, where he used to get up much, much more frequently. And then his urgency, we rank it, remember, 1 to 4, 4 being an emergency, his went down to a 2 out of 4. So that's closer to normal. And then another gentleman, he only got up 3 times last night. Normally he would get up 8 times in a night. So that's a huge improvement from a quality of life standpoint. That will actually make a massive difference in someone's quality of life long term, because they'll start to get restorative sleep. His urgency went from a 4 out of 4 down to a 1 out of 4, down to a normal sensation. And then he used to leak frequently because the urgency was so strong. And now his leaks have been cut down in half. Let me see if I have anyone else that I can talk about. Okay, here's somebody else. She is doing much better. Only got up once last night. Urgency is cut in half. Did not have to change her clothes at all, and her pads were close to dry. So again, that's what we focus on, sacral neuromodulation. And the research on this dates back, to the late 1800s, but basically if we use a little electrical stimulation, it'll help the busy signal to calm down and only the important signals to get through from your bladder to your brain. Let me look. Okay, what questions? Are there any questions that you guys have? And let's see, I'm going to look at one other article. This other article that I actually listed on this as well is urinary urgency, a symptom in need of a cure. And they describe urgency as a sudden, compelling desire to pass urine, which is difficult to defer. They also said that a lot of times people don't complain about this to their doctor, and I think some of it's because they're embarrassed. And they don't know that it's abnormal and that there are things that can be done. But then they go on to say urgency is more than a symptom. We talked about that. Really, it's the signals. It's kind of the smoke from the fire, that there's an underlying fire going on. There's some problem going on that needs to be addressed. And then they go through various different case reports. Some of those case reports, they're using medications and trying to help people with medications. Generally, medications can help urgency. but oftentimes, unfortunately, those medications have multiple side effects or can be very expensive. So for today's discussion, we talked about urgency, and urgency kind of goes along with frequency. We'll probably do our own thing on frequency again, but I hope you guys have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I am spending time with my family. We're going to my sister's house, and I am in charge of the mashed potatoes. So that's my specialty and my niche. So I do those every year, and I make the not healthy for you, but I use mashed potatoes, and kind of my magic to it, I guess, is putting cream cheese in it with a lot of butter. And then, of course, I put in bacon and chives and all the other kind of yummy stuff. If you guys have any questions, any comments, I would love to hear those. And thank you guys so much. God bless you guys, and have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.